On today's show, with Mark Zuckerberg bowing to Donald Trump's will over Meta's policies, how did the right end up dominating social media? And how can the left fight back? Plus, Keir Starmer wants to make the UK a world leader in AI. But with hostility to AI growing, could it backfire? And in the extra bit for supporters, The Economist columnist Duncan Robinson says no phrase better encapsulates the miserable state of Britain's political discourse than not a good look. We'll discuss the commentariat cliches that we think are not a good look. Let's meet today's panel. First, it's author and columnist Marie Leconte. Hi, Marie.
Hello.
It's reported that Dominic Cummings, remember him, has been coaching Elon Musk on his Brit bashing. How much do we know about their relationship?
So allegedly what's been going on is that Dominic Cummings and Elon Musk have been talking a lot over WhatsApp. And Cummings has been the one kind of telling Musk to go in hard against Keir Starmer on the grooming gangs and kind of stuff like that. But Cummings has apparently also been helping out with Doge, the kind of, government efficiency initiative headed by Musk. So it is worth saying that I think sources close to Dominic Cummings have said that that's not true at all. And that's probably the only time in my life where I've really wanted to put all my trust and faith in Dominic Cummings, because I'm like, please let this actually not be true. It feels like, you can't have a Matt King and a mad advisor. I think it's just like one of the two usually. It can't be both. So it seems that if it actually is happening, I think that is a sincere worry, because also they both strike me as people who just don't sleep enough and message too much.
Well, how do you have the time? I struggle to keep on top of my WhatsApp correspondence. And how do you have time? He runs 6 companies and a made-up department, and he's got time to respond to Dominic Cummings.
I would not want to see that messaging history. It's probably the same sort of volume as teenage girls, just incessant fucking WhatsApping.
Yeah, fun racist meme for you. Lol.
Oh, Dom.
Next up, the author and host of Jam Tomorrow, Ros Taylor. Hi, Ros.
Hello, Dorian.
The City and Anti-Corruption Minister Tulip Siddiq has resigned from the Treasury over corruption charges against her aunt, the former Bangladeshi PM Sheikh Hasina, although she denies wrongdoing. Why did this departure take so much longer than Louise Haig's? I think the stories started up about a month ago.
That's a very good question. The best way you can look at it is really to say that Starmer wanted to be in full possession of the facts before making a decision about her future. And so that's why he ordered the Laurie Magnus, sorry, I'll stop there because I can't remember his exact job title. I just cut that out. That's why he ordered Laurie Magnus to look into it. And Laurie Magnus looked into it admirably quickly. And although he said that she hadn't broken the ministerial code, he basically made it clear that he thought she ought to go anyway. So she did. And from that point of view, it was handled reasonably well. But nonetheless, as you say, the contrast with Louise Hay, who was out within hours, whereas Tulip Siddiq has been able to hang on, making increasingly untenable statements about what she knew and didn't know about the people she was accepting houses from. I hate to say this when we're going to discuss it later, but it doesn't look good.
You can't just rephrase it and get away with it. Would you have given the anti-corruption brief to somebody whose very powerful aunt was allegedly very corrupt?
No, I wouldn't personally. It's just impossible, because normally the anti-corruption minister will be working closely with anti-corruption NGOs and to try and stamp out, big corruption in the UK. And these are the very people who are also investigating her. You just can't, you can't have that kind of relationship. And you have to more widely question the judgment of someone who accepted these gifts of expensive property without inquiring who the true donor was. It wasn't the vigilance that you want to see in a government minister. I can only think that it's one of those psychological flaws that, to be fair, a lot of people have, where they do not want to accept that there might be quite large-scale corruption in their close family. And it does feel as if Siddiq just couldn't, judging by the way she responded to questions about this from Channel 4, for example, very aggressively, she just couldn't handle the thought that this was going on.
Yeah. Yes, the optics are bad. That's just me saying the same thing, isn't it? But I think Laurie Magnus was talking about a reputational damage or reputational problems.
Exactly.
So maybe that's the phrase we can settle on.
Yeah.
And finally, our guest today is Professor of Political and Social Theory at the University of East Anglia and an expert on online skullduggery, Alan Finlayson. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Dorian. Nice to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you. The latest YouGov poll, the first since the election, shows Reform overtaking the Tories and almost overtaking Labour with 25%. And they are particularly thrashing the Tories 4-1 among 18 to 24-year-olds. Now, Nigel Farage is on the old TikTok. How significant do you think Reform's appeal to younger voters is?
It's a hard one to judge because young people don't vote as much or as often as older people, so it may not make that much difference to elections this year or in 4 years' time. But it seems to me it's a straw in the wind that's worth paying attention to. It's not an outlier. There's lots of reasons to think that younger people are, if not drifting towards the right, then certainly drifting away from democracy, not confident about democracy. There have also been polls suggesting that many, or at least a fifth of younger people, would accept authoritarian rule of some kind. So it tells you there's a generation out there that is not happy, and that unhappiness is unlikely to be confined just to those who take the extreme reaction to it. And as that generation gets older and doesn't enter into what we might have once called normal politics, then that's going to have an effect more broadly.
I mean, this is the most extreme example of, be careful what you wish for, because like the Tories just seem completely toxic, almost like a non-entity when it comes to this age group. But it's not as if everybody then turns to groovy social democracy.
No, we have this sort of idea in our head, don't we, that the young people are the radicals, the change makers who are going to push all us oldies to do things differently. And that's really only been the case for certain periods of time. Or the alternative way of understanding it is that actually what's happened is that what we used to call the alternative, the counterculture of the 60s, left-wing radicalism, that's no longer the anti-system, screw the man position.
Yeah.
That I think is what's going on here. That what appeals now, the position that looks dangerous, that looks transgressive, that looks exciting, that looks like smash the system, don't live with the man, that's being captured by the right, and that's really significant.
Well, one fun, i.e. scary, fact was that 3/4 of Oswald Mosley's fascists at the Battle of Cable Street were under 18. So the kids were very much not all right at that point in time.
That's a scary fact to be reminded of, isn't it? And I suppose we have to put our faith in the feeling that all these young people who are supporting reform are on their bedrooms on their phones and not going to be going out to be involved in the confrontations.
Don't vote, kids. Before we start, oh God, what else? Our special Patreon-only Q&A session on Zoom returns next Thursday, the 23rd of January, with me, Rachel Cunliffe and Andrew Harrison. We'll be enjoying some exclusive Oh God, What Now style chat, answering your questions and remarking on one another's bookshelves. It's free to Patreon people, so sign up now and get details of how to register. Let's begin. Until recently, Mark Zuckerberg was keeping a relatively low profile while Elon Musk publicly lost both his mind and his customers. But as we discussed last week, he's gone all in on appeasing Trump, from loosening hate speech guidelines and ditching fact-checkers to cutting DEI initiatives and ponying up $1 million for the inauguration, where he will be a guest of honour alongside fellow tech moguls Musk and Jeff Bezos. Silicon Valley's chieftains have been moving right for a long time, but now it's clear that they want social media itself to have a right-wing bias. The right also dominates podcasting, not us, and other sectors of the internet. Is this a systemic tendency, or could it have panned out differently, and what can politicians on the left do about it? Alan, the internet has been a boon for far-right extremists since the 1990s, but that certainly wasn't the valence of Twitter or Facebook a decade ago. Is this just sort of rose-tinted spectacles? Was there a time when social media seemed more open and equal, or even, as GB News declared just a couple of years ago, that it was broadly left-wing?
I think it's a bit of rose-tinted spectacles, but it's also that in the early days of the internet, we didn't see most of the internet. We only saw, I found rather pleasant, kind of amateur blogs and amateur posting boards where you would find things that would interest you and share hobbies and share ideas. What we didn't see was happening at that time was the right recognizing the potential of this technology, the potential for it to bring together people who otherwise had not been able to get together because their politics were somewhat beyond the pale, and their capacity to then reach wider audiences and begin circulating their politics much more broadly. And they were really thinking and planning that a lot earlier. You've got to remember, it sounds extraordinary to say, but lots of the very far right, the white nationalist right in the US, was really online in as much as you could be back in the 80s and early 90s because they were so far out. they already had experience of using those kinds of media. Other less extreme but still radical right voices had their own separate media ecologies of magazines and talk radio shows. So they were kind of ready to make use of this new media, while mainstream politics was so usefully and helpfully and comfortably embedded in the mainstream that it didn't really have to think about it.
So for social media companies, growth means more engagement, which means promoting more inflammatory material via algorithms and light touch moderation. And so I wondered when reading about this, do the commercial incentives automatically favour the right, or was the right more cunning than the left? Are there things that could have been done differently by the users, regardless of what the decisions being made by the owners were?
So that's a really excellent and really complicated question. And I'm going to answer it by answering a slightly different question first, which is to think about how those platforms were designed. The people who designed those platforms, let's say stereotypically San Francisco, California, Americans used to gaming and with a certain kind of outlook on life, built platforms that were very competitive, that rewarded you for competitive behaviors, that structured competition and dispute within them, because that's the kind of worldview they had. So they already had embedded into their design a certain idea of how debate, discussion, discourse should be. Competitive, the loudest comes out on top, get rewarded if you can get lots of people to like you or cheer you on. So that began to set up certain kinds of dynamics. And then once the economic incentives were added on top of that, the software, the platform wants you to attend to it, wants you to pay attention so it can count your hours looking, say you advertising, then of course the algorithm begins responding to that and thinking, okay, what's going to get the most attention? And at first that was sending you things you liked and things your friends liked. That's what Facebook was doing back until around 2012. But then it realized that was only going to be pushing views up to a certain amount. So the algorithm shifted to responding those things which got engagement and got your blood going. And we all know what those kinds of things are. So that then rewarded content that was shocking or annoying or that could circulate quickly with people saying, oh God, look at this, you won't believe it. And that began to shift it not just to the political right, but to those who could capitalize on that kind of content, who wanted to be shocking, who wanted to claim that transgressive sense of shock for themselves.
Now, my impression of Zuckerberg is that he likes money. Do you think he ever felt responsible for his company's pernicious effects, whether it's like Instagram boosted eating disorders or Facebook enabled genocide in Myanmar? Or is it clear now, was he forced to pretend that he was, and now he just doesn't have to, and it's just easier and financially beneficial to him to just not do it?
Well, they've certainly have appeared to care in the past, not just by setting up content moderation systems, but by sometimes talking about things they got wrong, sometimes acknowledging, some senior executives acknowledge the damage that social media seems to do to young people and have admitted that they don't let their own children go on these social media platforms. But I think behind that was always something more general, perhaps, than just being liberal or right wing. The tech corporations and those at the top have an extremely strong opinion of themselves and of their ability to be change makers and world leaders. They think of themselves as this generation's Rockefellers who are going to build America, conquer new territories, solve all kinds of problems. And they think that their tech understanding can solve all kinds of problems, not just software and data gathering problems. And I think they began to see quite early on, particularly with the volume of money that was going into this, that this was a platform not just for the acquisition of wealth for its own sake, but also the acquisition of wealth standing power. There's a lot of these people are sci-fi, adventure, comic book fans, right? And that plays into the way they talk about themselves and think about themselves. Palantir, the big data collection company, the guy who runs that likes people to call him Batman. They has Batman imagery in his head office. So these people do think of themselves as the heroes astride the colossus astride the modern world. And I think that's a very intoxicating thing for them to feel. And that's part of what motivates them. And if power is now where Trump is, they'll go there.
I don't think Batman would do that. But anyway, Roz, Zuckerberg claims that fact checkers have a liberal bias, but disinformation, it turns out, is not politically neutral. It's been shown to come far more from the right. So is this the fundamental imbalance which poisons any consideration of moderation and free speech?
Yeah, I mean, it is clearly a problem. The studies seem to show that there's more disinformation on the right than on the left. The problem then is what you do with that knowledge. And where you take it from there. Do you say, well, you're wrong and you're wrong more often and so on? Do you take that approach? Or do you try and take what I would see as a more pragmatic approach and perhaps a useful approach and ask what function is the disinformation serving? What feelings does that disinformation want to stir up and exploit? And most importantly, what gut feeling does it claim to confirm? Because if you look at disinformation, it's usually trying to bear out a feeling that some people might have but don't have evidence for, and it's coming up with often fake or exaggerated evidence for it. And I think that addressing that gut feeling head on is the most useful way of tackling this, because if you don't, then the right will, and they're doing it quite effectively already. So the important thing is to go after what the purpose the disinformation is serving for the people who are doing it, and not just say it's all rubbish, even if it is.
But not. I mean, we saw people back on the the Remainer Twitter who would also do disinformation again because they made good little kind of good followings for themselves with this kind of nonsense that felt good.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's not the answer. Is just for the kind of left and liberals to have their own bullshit.
No, people go after and like having their own gut feelings reinforced and played back to them. It can work on both sides.
And we've seen people like Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand, Joe Rogan make a fortune from clicks, ads and endorsements. They seem to do better the more right-wing they are. And as in traditional publishing, obviously we know how newspapers work, is it the big money is just to be found on the right, that's where all their financial incentives are?
I think the right certainly has a more confident relationship with money, because where the left might see a grifter, naming no names, Russell Brand, for example, but where the left might see a grifter, the right will see an entrepreneur and someone who is making lots of money out of being really good at what he does. And that's why, for example, I wasn't particularly surprised when Peter Mandelson was made UK ambassador to the US, because he understands that worldview quite well. You may remember years ago when he talked about Labour being intensely comfortable with people getting filthy rich as long as they paid their taxes. But it's a mindset that he understands. And unlike most people on the left who have a bit of an allergy to monetising things, and the right doesn't have any of those scruples. I was struck recently looking at Labour's website and looking at the 5 things that are on the front of Labour's website, which it says you can do to help the Labour Party. And of course, one of them is signing up to an email newsletter, obviously. But 2 of them are donating money into what is a lottery, basically, where you have a chance of winning. And the contrast with that and the powerlessness and the kind of randomness of what they're offering there, and a right-wing influencer who is saying, I can help you change your life, look how I have changed mine, is very strong.
Well, it's interesting that Ogre What Now never gets advertisements for gold or health supplements, reptile oil to make you strong. Not that I'm asking for those. It's just interesting that we don't get them. Alan, many Meta employees oppose these changes that Zuckerberg has introduced, just as most Twitter staff opposed Musk's takeover before he sacked them. Is this rightward tendency happening throughout Silicon Valley's workforce, or is it mostly in the C-suites, creating perhaps tension between the bosses and the workers?
I think it's mostly happening at this stage, not exclusively, but this stage it's happening in the CEO's offices. And that's partly for business reasons. Another reason why they're attracted to Trump and want to get on side with Trump is, well, partly they don't want him to punish them for not supporting him earlier, but also they need him. They need the US state to protect them. There are threats to their business. Brazil shut down X until Musk agreed to back down. Australia is talking about age verification and not letting young people on. The EU keeps talking about forms of regulation. So the Silicon Valley firms would quite like a government that will stand up to that kind of regulation, that will include that in its aggressive trade deals. They also want a White House that will support crypto, which many of them have extreme interests in, as well as things like AI. So there's good reasons for them to snuggle up to the state. There's no one who's as keen on the state as a libertarian when it comes to protecting their business. That's part. But when it comes to ideology, I think shouldn't underestimate how much they also share some of the ideology, how much they share some of the hostility to the liberal state, to the interventionist state, to certain concepts of equality that they think limit their attempts to run the world as they see fit. So it's maybe looking like perhaps Facebook was, as you say, pretending a bit when it jumped on the post Black Lives Matter DEI bandwagon, and now it's getting back to what it really wants to do. Although it's not really convincing when you see Zuckerberg on Joe Rogan trying to be cool, trying to be one of the hard kids, talking about bringing masculinity back. He doesn't really look convincing, despite the new look and the new hairstyle and the new T-shirt.
I saw some people scolding the Democrats for driving away big tech by, trying to regulate or reduce their power. But it does seem like, well, that doesn't mean that that those policies were bad. It does seem to be like, don't threaten the rich people, because then the rich people will turn against you, which just seems like a kind of I'm not sure that's a political it might be true, but it doesn't seem like that's a political prescription of just like let the rich people do what they want.
No, that's exactly it. There's a profound political difference here. I mean, the Democrats haven't been particularly keen on regulating private enterprise, but they have been a little bit more keen on regulating some parts of it. And there clearly are reasons for the rich and powerful to think the Democrats might drift a little bit more that way, particularly after these recent defeats and seeing where they're losing and gaining votes. So again, it makes sense for the Republicans and the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs to come together and unite around a common interest, not just domestically, but also internationally.
Marie, you are extremely online, so let's pan out here, but in a good way. What has happened to the online left? Because many key figures, I'm not even talking about your Glenn Greenwalds and Matt Taibbi from a while back, but like Young Turks, Red Scare, Jimmy Dore, particularly that sort of dirtbag left, they're just Trump fans now. And I don't know who the big names are that are that could provide some kind of genuine counterbalance.
Well, so I think there's a few different things at play here. So I think firstly, and I think Ross touched on it earlier, there's just a lot less money on the left, I think, in general. Like you're less likely to get kind of, creepy rich men to kind of, fund your podcast, fund your kind of books, fund your whatever else you're trying to do. So, that's the start of saying, actually, if you can't quite make a comfortable living doing those things, then you're probably less likely to keep doing them. I think the second thing is like there's nothing. So broadly on the left, there's nothing that the left hates more than the left. And I think the problem with that is that eventually that becomes quite boring, I think, and not quite talking obviously about this fine podcast, but especially the kind of more dud-baggy left kind of ones. They probably just ended up sort of hating the centre and right of the Democrats more than anyone else. And I think, again, that's not as interesting, I think, after a while. But also, I can find the horseshoe theory stuff to be a bit overdone sometimes, but I think on that stuff that is true. I think if you really spend that much time trying to own the libs, then you will probably end up having exactly the same talking points, actually, as, the people trying to own the libs from the other side.
But there also seems to be that thing that Alan was alluding to, and it sounds awful because nobody wants to hear that conservatism is the new punk rock or something, but they like being transgressive. That's a lot of that energy of the dirtbag left. And then you start kind of poking at identity politics, and then you poke so hard that your hand goes through, and suddenly you're just using slurs in an unironic way.
I think they just like being edgy, and I think that's a mix of kind of, the dirtbag left, but also that's very much online culture. I think that's just internet culture in general, where you want to be in the part of the counterculture, you want to trigger people a bit. And, and again, I felt like for quite a long time that was not a left thing or a right thing. That was just internet culture in general, because it'd been built mostly, let's be honest, by teenage boys and their kind of fellow travelers. So I think that was part of the thing. And I'm sure I've mentioned it on podcasts before, but I was definitely a teenage edgelord. Thankfully, I personally grew up, but then I think lots of people didn't. And especially, I think, over the 4 years of having, Joe Biden was probably the worst possible person for all those people, because he was actually quite boring, obviously very much on the kind of center of the Democrats, at least kind of in terms of the rhetoric. But also doing stuff that, they can even get super mad about, aside from, I think, Gaza is a separate thing. But I think in terms of domestic policy, if you're looking at the US. And so I think that's why they, just ended up really doubling down on the kind of edginess and going a bit like, well, fuck all the boring liberal stuff. And I can't remember who posted about it, but there's something slightly mean of saying that if you want to understand the dirtbag left, you have to understand that they just really hate their parents and their lovely suburban homes and, with their lovely lives. And actually, I mean, it rings true, I think, to quite a lot of them. And actually, Trump is also someone that, those lovely suburban centrist people probably hate. And so it just feels like weird class self-hatred in a way.
We talk a lot about online radicalization among users of social media. But are you surprised by how many high-profile figures have gone down the rabbit hole? And I would say that maybe Kemi Badenoch is not down the rabbit hole yet, but she's saturated in the online right. And we're now seeing more and more leaders and business leaders whose brains have been somewhat fried by the internet.
Yes, I have a new theory on that. I'm very happy with it. I think it's got...
New theory klaxon.
Well, yeah. Wow, that was a really bad klaxon. I'm going to... Yeah. I'm not adding that to my list of skills, doing klaxon
The right-wing
noises.
podcasts have better klaxons.
Yeah. But no. So this is something I've been thinking about quite a lot recently, and I think that for about let's say around a decade, kind of, we can round up a bit. People, the kind of early days of social media, people said, actually, this is amazing, this kind of great leveler, this great equalizer. We're on the same platforms together, and we've got all these politicians and kind of elites from different, areas of the world, etc., powerful people, and we get to tell them when we think they're wrong. We get to tell them that we think they're dicks. We get to, we get to insult them if we think they deserve it, etc. So this is great democratization, of kind of power dynamics, and. I guess I bought into it to an extent as well. But I think what people completely failed to see for those years, and I think, we're kind of finally reaping what we sowed. Yeah. I had a second of that in English. Is it something fucked up like soon? And I think, we're kind of reaping what we sowed now, in that actually turns out all those people still have the power. They're still, and I'm not saying that in a conspiratorial way, but like they're still the elites, they're still the politicians, the CEOs, etc. But also they've just spent 10 years being yelled at day in, day out by sort of everyone. And actually, turns out that's probably going to make you quite resentful and quite radicalized. And I know it's not quite, it's a different kettle of fish to an extent, and it's not a topic I want to get into necessarily, but I think J.K. Rowling being quite a good example of, I think, her politics, whatever you make of them, which I personally find, quite abhorrent, but were definitely shaped by getting yelled at online every single day, week after week, month after month. And I think that's happened to so many other figures. I think Elon Musk could probably argue, that's partially why he bought Twitter, etc. So I think we do have this sense of elite radicalization, which I personally think, and again, this is a new theory, so it may be wrong, maybe see how it tastes, but I do think that's at least partly because, again, they just got yelled at for 10 years, and actually that's probably going to break your brain.
Nobody should yell at us because we might go crazy.
Yeah, I think the whole Clay Shirky, here comes everybody sort of era in the sort of late 2000s, I suppose it was, when everyone was getting very excited about how wonderful and democratic the web was going to be, that Marie was talking about. I think what we failed to notice at the time was how the platforms were already shaping how we were going to interact. And it felt quite liberating in a strange way to be on a social media platform, because you were reaching such a crazy number of people at the same time, which was not possible really before. But it turned out that all the mechanisms that were being used to shape our interactions have had a really powerful effect, and not always a positive effect, on how we talk to each other, not just online, but more widely.
Alan Starmer is a very offline character, but he's had to acknowledge the damage Musk is doing with that speech last week. I mean, it's perhaps one of the biggest questions in the world at the moment. So you don't have to answer it fully. But I mean, I'm just wondering, in your work, what can Labour and other centre-left governments do about sort of social media as a newly hostile force that can skew elections and create a disinformation environment?
That is a big question. If I had the answer to that, I'd be on every podcast going.
And you'd have a job in the Labour government, yeah.
Yeah. I think, well, let's just break that down into two different things. There's one which is having a relationship with the social media companies, and that's sort of maybe the more traditional way to think about it, and we've discussed that a little bit. The other is to think about how actually you might use social media in ways that are beneficial to your cause and to your politics. I'm not sure if the Labour government or Labour Party is the vehicle for that. I think it's important to recognise that the politics we're talking about hasn't really been attached just to a political party. We're talking about a much broader, rather amorphous swathes of different kinds of reactionary politics online that are currently articulated through Trump rather than the Republican Party, and through Farage rather than Reform here. So there's a lot of complexity going on there. But I think the first thing I would say to think about is one of the essential characteristics of the internet, perhaps the one we like about it, is that it's participatory, that you can engage with it in some way. You can respond to the article. You can have a conversation with people about it. You can make your own content. So it breaks down the relationship between politician, reporter, and audience in a very profound way. And so what succeeds online is things which can give, either for real or simulate, the feeling of participation and of being involved and part of the conversation. So the style of right-wing YouTubers, for example, is one that, even when it's a long lecture of a Peterson types, very much appeals to you, implicates you in what's being said, offers you things to do. You talked about the adverts for gold and various supplements. It brings those in as part of the broader appeal. If you think like this and you can feel better, you can be smarter, you'll understand what's going on, you can be richer. If you take these, you'll be healthier. So it offers people a way to engage with the discussion and debate, to feel that they're doing something, they're active, and not just passive consumers of news wondering what on earth is going on. So I think appealing in that participatory way is absolutely crucial. And we can think about how that's grown and taken off at the time when political parties, Conservative or Labour, have had shrinking memberships who are less involved in making policy and don't really engage or use their audiences. As far as I'm aware, there aren't really local Labour Party Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups where you can feel part of the movement, feel you're shaping policy. So I think that's a big part of what has to change. But also to have a look and think about what are people doing online, even some of the people that we might find the most difficult. I don't mean the Russell Brands and the Jordan Petersons, but the people who are using and responding and taking part. I think what they're getting in part from that is some kind of explanation, some kind of understanding of what's going on. And I think that in the 90s into the 2000s, our politics, because it became a little bit cozy and comfortable and people were settled that we'd solved all the problems after the Cold War and everybody agreed what was going on, and as new kinds of elite took office across politics and economics, questions cease to be asked. And people are not unreasonable in asking what's going on. Why is the country changing? Why is there immigration like this? What's it for? Why are the prices going up? Why are people wanting this, that, and the other, and asking this about pronouns and so on? It's not wrong to ask that question. And people want answers, and they go online. They can be freed now, importantly, from the time schedule of newspapers and of daily news and of news broadcasts and the political calendar. They can go at any time. They can listen to this podcast at any time, and they can go and look online and find out what's happening. And if you go online and you ask what's happening, you're going to get probably a reactionary answer, because they recognized earlier on how to get onto the channels, get on the platforms, and provide people with understandings. What we're talking about here isn't just people making little jokes on Twitter. This is 3-hour-long YouTube videos. It's films authored by Tommy Robinson. It's long, detailed material that's trying to say to you, this is what's going on. This is what they're doing. You can understand it and you can be part of it. And in the face of that, if Starmer is saying, oh, I don't like performative politics, just leave it with us. We've got some experts here. Who's going to win?
Marie, you brought up this when we were discussing it. There is a growing gender divide in politics, with men well to the right of women. In fact, you can see that in the latest YouGov poll. So if we're saying, OK, look, the culture of the internet is partly responsible for men moving right, can it also be responsible for women moving left? Like, is there something that we're maybe sort of missing there?
Oh, absolutely. And I think so I found it quite frustrating sort of seeing a lot of the takes, of people going, oh, well, the internet is turning everyone to a reactionary and everyone is, going all try to that. No, men, if you want to say men, just say men. It's not, because if you kind of look at the kind of, again, if you look at any kind of intentional if you look at any polling, in the UK, in the US, and I think quite a lot, South Korea being quite a good example, I think in France to an extent, etc., like, in quite a lot of countries, it is absolutely true that men under the age of, let's say, roughly under 45 are going more right. But, the women are doing exactly the same thing, but the opposite way. And they're voting, but especially not just for the kind of traditional centre-left parties, but for the Greens, for kind of equivalent, so like further left parties. So there's a massive gendered thing here. And I'm not sure why that is. And this is very much a theory. I have no idea if it's true or not. But I wonder if is because the nature of the internet is just quite reactive, but, you know, in the sense that human nature is quite reactive. We react to the things that happen to us. And I think that if you're a woman online and you don't even have to have a massive profile, but you kind of see the way men behave, the way actually women with a profile, you know, get treated either by the creeps or the kind of rape threats, etc. Because I think a lot of women have been really open about that. Then presumably that is going to send you down a certain path of going, or maybe feminism is still very, very, very needed, you know, for example, and then from that you can kind of travel down some kind of more progressive politics. So I would assume it is just quite reactive.
So Andrew Tate could almost be actually quite a strong advertisement for feminism, because it's like, not that.
Well, yeah, no, exactly. I think if you're like a 13-year-old girl and, you know, the boys around you at school keep talking about Andrew Tate and occasionally the algorithm, you know, recommends you videos, you're probably just a bit like, no, thank you. No, I'm good.
I think women are also often at the sharp end of the, in Britain anyway, it applies decisions on austerity. You know, it's women who see what schools are becoming. It's women who are often dealing with the NHS not doing stuff, with the lack of social care. All those things are going to have an impact on our political views.
All the offline stuff.
All the offline stuff.
Well, look, because we need to buy a proper klaxon, we're going to be relaunching Oh God, What Now next week. It's going to be a 3-hour-long video podcast, which will make you happier, healthier, stronger, and more attractive. Now it's time for But Your Emails, when we answer a question from one of our Patreon backers. Sign up and you can put us on the spot. This week's question comes from WGK, which I believe is an energy drink. I realise that this would be bad news for podcasts like yours, but if we're going to have Dryanuary and Veganuary, should we have a national month of politics at some time in the year too? I would nominate September, when the party conferences are on. It would be interesting to see if some of the windbags who fill the airwaves would wither away without public attention. Marie.
I have a view on this. No, I wrote about it a few years ago. I think that's completely right. But the problem is that month kind of used to exist, and it was called August not that long ago. You know, there used to be summer recess, and that's what we had this silly season, where essentially whoever was left, you know, the kind of dregs of the newsroom had to somehow fill the newspaper with stuff, even though nothing was going on. But no, and I think that's one of those actually sort of like quite quietly big things that have happened without anyone noticing, which is that social media means that, at least in Britain, you know, recess doesn't really exist anymore, because it used to be the case of MPs would go on holiday, or they would just go spend some time in their constituency and kind of check in. And I know it's a cliche thing to say, right? But I check in with normal people from their patch and talk about what mattered to them, talking to their association or CLP, etc. And then they would come back to Parliament in September, and then, you know, politics as usual would resume. But then Twitter completely broke that Twitter and WhatsApp, because that meant that journalists could still just endlessly WhatsApp MPs could still endlessly WhatsApp each other. And that, you know, in Twitter obviously always brought in political discourse. So I think that month has been lost. So I completely agree. But I guess, yeah, my point is that it did used to exist. We just need to bring it back, return.
Well, I hate to kind of turn a really fun question into a drag. But I kind of think of that Trotsky quote that you might not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And I see a lot of people just going, American people on Blue Sky going, I cannot even think about that man. I'm just going to tune him out for the next 4 years. And it's like, okay, that on an individual level, go for it. But on a mass level, that seems like a really terrible response. And unfortunately, one does have to sort of know what's going on and engage. And I worry that if you had a month where you didn't have to think about politics, you'd be like one of those people that does dry January and then just goes, oh, I guess I'm just going to give up drinking now.
Yeah,
like, why would you go back?
Politics has a habit of happening, as you say, anyway. I mean, this August, the riots. You know, we can't just shut it down. That's why Starmer had to cancel his holiday, right? Stuff happens. And with the party conferences, personally, I love the party conferences and always interested in and happy to hear about what parties are up to.
Some of your best friends are windbags.
Yeah. So, you know, I would not want to close down political debate at that time. I think it's one of the most interesting times of the year. But hey, you know, if you want to have a month off from politics, have a month off from politics.
Create your own month off.
Yeah, whatever.
Next up, Keir Starmer says he wants to make the UK a global AI powerhouse led by the state rather than private companies. Led by the state more than by private companies. Ros, looking at it, London and the Cambridge cluster are among the world's top tech hubs, right? The early pioneers of computing, from like Lovelace to Turing, British, Google's DeepMind originates in Britain. So on that level, it kind of makes sense. And it's not like we don't do any AI. But did it feel a bit sudden to you, Starmer's sort of announcement? Where did all this come from?
Well, not so much really. I mean, although he dislikes social media, I think he is keen, Starmer, on building things. And he was a very early adopter of using computers for work as well, surprisingly. He had a computer at home when he was a young lawyer, which was quite unusual at that time. So, and he does enjoy trying to fix things. I mean, it's the whole tool make. Let's not go into tool makers. But anyway, he does enjoy fixing things and making things happen. And we had, during the Sunak era, we had a somewhat different approach to AI, where you may remember he was cozying up to oh God, do I have to mention him again? Elon Musk, and talking about crypto asset technology, which was a big thing for Sunak in 2022. UK was going to be a hub for crypto asset technology, which now feels terribly dated. Starmer's vision is much more about, firstly, economic growth, and secondly, getting the state involved. And not just in terms of building the infrastructure that you need to have this AI boom, but also in deploying AI to work in the public sector, so in the NHS and in potentially in education and so on. And there's also a feeling that Sunak banged on too much about AI safety, and that was putting off some companies from investing.
Well, I'm going to come back to that. As an AI skeptic, I think the most compelling pitch for what Labour's doing is that, look, it's here to stay and we can't trust big tech. So the British state is compelled to play a big role rather than sort of cede the field to erratic billionaires. And I found that quite compelling. Far more compelling than some of the more, sort of fanciful stuff about the magic of ChatGPT. What did you make of it?
Yeah, there is that point of view, and it is compelling. I mean, the phrase that was used in the report that came out was an AI maker, not an AI taker, and that does seem quite seductive. Whether you can actually achieve that, given that the US is probably going for a very lax approach to AI regulation, and the EU is almost doing the opposite, I don't know. But this whole way of thinking about AI does tend to come from what was traditionally the Blairite wing of the party. So the Tony Blair Institute has been very big on AI, and it's always become a running joke in think tank land that any problem that the public sector has can be solved by AI, according to the Tony Blair Institute.
Well, Blair's always like that. He's just technology, the future.
Which is a bit of exaggeration, but there's a grain of truth in it. And you might think that there were potential conflicts with unions and AI over job losses. But when you actually think about it, when you think about which sectors are unionised, it's less of a problem than you'd imagine, because most unionised sectors would be quite hard to replace with AI. It's kind of knowledge workers like myself and like you, Dorian, who are seriously at risk, and we are less likely to be unionised and less likely to be able to go on strike in a meaningful way.
A machine can't do this shit. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you say that.
This is quality audio.
But it's, so the aim is, the report is very big on building what it calls sovereign AI compute, which might not make any sense as a phrase to you, but compute is the term for computational power, which basically means where you're going to actually do the really energy-intensive processing. And they want that to be done as much as possible in Britain, and also to do deals with the private sector so that they have access to this computing power so that they can then use it in the public sector.
I kind of feel it's almost like with sort of defence, is that I'm not a great kind of guns and ammo kind of person, but you just think it's quite important for Britain to not be reliant on America, and it feels like that also as almost a national security.
They were getting a bit. Some countries have become a bit reliant on doing this processing in countries with lots of solar power, but that is a security risk.
Alan, there is a tension between those two goals pursued by Sunak, AI development and AI safety. It's very crudely, you've got growth and then you've got regulation. But, I mean, AI safety does seem quite important. Is Labour sort of reacting by maybe not talking enough about the latter? How much of that is part of their pitch?
Well, they've tried to reassure people and get over some of their fears. That seems to be part of the pitch that they're making. perhaps better at making that little bit of the pitch than explaining exactly how the AI is going to work. And I think they're going to risk pushback from people who are concerned about the safety of data. Is it protected? What will it be used for? I think they're going to be worried about the partnerships with corporations and private companies. It won't just be UK sovereign. They already are giving data to American companies. They'll be giving over more data. People will be upset about that. The environmental costs, as you've already mentioned. And I think concerns about how it's actually going to work. The big problem with the AI is, how's the algorithms working? What's it doing? We can't see it. And if it's proprietorial, we can't question it or work with it. So will we end up with the tail wagging the dog, as it were, civil servants and government officials doing what they're told to do by the machine, rather than being able to instruct the machine to be more useful for them? But I think this is also, partly to pick up on what Ross said, this is Starmer was going to cross this moment at some point where he hit the kind of Blairite tech issue and tried to make that his own. It's something that British prime ministers, not just Labour, always do. They bank a lot on technology. One of the peculiar things I've done in my job is read every single party leader's speech to their conference since about 1895. And after the war, particularly, that's there before, they all have a passage on technology at some point. They talk about how wonderful Britain is at technology, how it's innate in the English spirit, it's in our sinews and bones and so forth. And they usually give the same examples. Macmillan gives them and Wilson gives them: hovercraft, radar, and penicillin. They're particularly proud of. And then, of course, Blair comes along, and as Rosa mentions, if you remember, it was the information superhighway in 1997 and the knowledge economy, and now it's AI. So there's something in there which I think appeals both to an idea of Englishness, but also to a Labour Prime Minister, appeals to them as some idea of this is the state working with hard-working industry to create new things. And I can see why that's appealing, but I'm not convinced it's going to be all that.
Well, you can put it in the lineage of Harold Wilson's, White Heat.
Yeah, the White Heat.
God
Absolutely.
damn it, I was going to say it.
You got to get Burley to catch me out.
Exactly. Although not a conference speech, he says that in something else.
All right.
Marie,
I'm not a leader speech.
Oh, messed that one up. Marie, not so long ago, AI seemed quite exciting, if a bit scary. People go, it could be good, but it might destroy us all. But over the last, just literally a couple of years, it's developed this reputation, above all, I think, for producing slop and taking people's jobs and stealing their work. And even Sunak, I didn't realise this in his 2023 summit at Bletchley Park, said the overarching risk is a loss of trust in the trustworthiness of this technology. Not the most elegant formulation, but you can see where he's going with that. So when Starmer is waxing lyrical, or Tech Minister Peter Kyle is raving about how good ChatGPT is, are they reading the room sufficiently? Was there enough in this presentation to acknowledge that actually a lot of people, when they hear the word AI now, think, uh-oh?
So it slightly felt like a case of being careful what you wish for, because I think that for the past 6 months, many commentators, myself included, have said, oh my God, Keir Starmer and the government are kind of being so gloomy about everything, so pessimistic. We need some energy. We need some faith in the future, some cool stuff. And then it was like, sure, I heard you guys loud and clear. We're going to go all in on AI. And is that, well, not that though. Maybe we should have been more specific. So I think, again, it's felt jarring specifically because I think the government has not been all out enthusiastic about that many things so far, and somehow that's the one thing where they're like, nope, no downsides whatsoever. Which obviously I jest, and I think Keir Starmer did get across, I think, the sense that it is obviously a very big thing, would be a massive shift, etc. But I don't know. I wonder, and that's the very cynical part of me, if it's maybe partially explained by the fact that, the Treasury is very ill. The economy is not doing well. And I think there's a sense that Labour probably thought that they could come in and be like, essentially, if we just stop mismanaging everything, the economy will probably pick up reasonably quickly. And it just has not done that. Don't ask me why I don't do the economy. And then there's a slight sense of desperation of going, but AI, that is the thing. That is the thing. That growth, because they had been talking about growth for a very long time, but it's not entirely clear to me or anyone that they really had a plan. So the more cynical view is maybe they've gone all in because they were just like, well, we need growth from somewhere, and that mystery box all looks appealing.
Well, Alan Starmer generally is quite kind of don't get excited. But here, what really struck me, and I had to check this, he talks about AI doubling productivity within a few years. And low productivity has been the kind of bane of the British economy for more than a decade. What? Like, am I missing something? Is this a thing that could definitely happen?
Well, I think this goes back to, as Ross has already mentioned, this is the hand of the Tony Blair Institute here. Tony Blair, in his book on leadership, which came out last year, he urges the world's leaders the phrase he uses is to make your countries a sandpit for these companies. I think he's been having a word with Keir Starmer, who perhaps got excited by the sandpit and is channeling that idea that this can solve all our problems. No, I don't think that can happen. I don't think that the speeches or the documents explained how that could happen. They said in some cases they could reduce costs, i.e. reduce labour power and therefore put people out of work. But I couldn't see the argument for how it's going to make things work better or work more efficiently. And I wonder, I presume that Keir Starmer maybe and Peter Carr haven't ever worked in an organisation at the time of the dreadful rollout of some new software system that then messes everything up and messes your workplace up for days, weeks, months, because it's been rolled in badly and doesn't actually work, and you have to learn to do the job the way it wants you to do the job rather than it help you do the job. It's actually, I think, there's therefore a risk that it will cost more, that you'll need somebody to check what the AI is doing.
Well, the post office scandal is a good lesson there, isn't it?
Absolutely.
About don't trust your cool new computers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just to sort of finish up with maybe a couple more of the negatives here, Ros, I found it interesting that Labour, upfront acknowledged AI's tendency to guzzle huge amounts of carbon and water and is involving Ed Miliband in the initiative. So does this suggest that they are actually, being really quite, responsible and candid about some of the downsides that they might not have mentioned?
Well, I think they do have a bit of a plan in this area because they want to have what they called AI growth zones. And those are going to be in industrial towns or just outside industrial towns and coastal Scotland. Now, the reason why they want to have them in those areas, two reasons. One is that land is cheaper there. And the other is that there's potentially a lot of clean energy that you can generate nearby from wind and hydroelectric power. And so they're hoping that although these will be guzzling electricity, that they can generate that electricity in a clean way. In fact, there are proposals, which the government hasn't made up its mind on what to do about yet, to make electricity cheaper in parts of the country where it's cheaper to generate it, specifically in order to try and get industry to move to those areas. So they've got that in mind.
And Marie, finally, we are all, I think, here writers of books that have probably been harvested by large learning models. Now, copyright law does not, it seems, may not cover this because it's not actually reproducing chunks. It's just learning. So it's using it like a sort of giant library. Do you see a realistic settlement for creatives whose work is being used in this way? Because obviously they're very angry, and as soon as AI is mentioned by Starmer, they're just like, well, what about this? Do you see a kind of way that people would get protected or paid or?
No, I don't. Because I think Sam Altman of OpenAI has stated quite clearly that if they did have to pay, remunerate in some way, all the people whose stuff they were kind of like feeding into the LLMs, then they could not make the companies work at all. And I think what's crucial to remember is that big tech people have always managed to dictate the terms of engagement in terms of what they do. And it kind of reminds me, I think it was Alex Hearn, who used to be the tech editor at The Guardian, who made the point at someone of saying, why were you accepting at face value, the thing that either Zuckerberg, kind of like senior tech people, are saying about moderation? Why can they not spend, billions more every year on having everything properly moderated? Why have we just accepted that, oh, well, it would cost too much because it'd be too labor intensive? It's like, but we've seen their profits. Like, they can afford it. Their profits would be a lot smaller, but they would still be able to profit.
Well,
and I think that
Zuckerberg like the third richest person in the world. So when he just goes, "Oh, I can't afford this," it's just like,
no,
really, mate?
Yeah. And I worry, that the AI stuff is going to be exactly the same. I think, again, big tech has always been very, very good at dictating the terms of engagement. So if they've gone, oh, well, we can reasonably pay for this. So if you want the future to be exciting, then gimme. then people will just roll over.
Because I like lots of aspects of, a technology, but whenever we discuss this, it makes me want to do the Butlerian Jihad in June.
Yes, this year.
Where they destroy all the machines.
One of the things they want to do is have a massive media asset training database, as they call it, which is going to drag in stuff from the BBC, the British Library, the National Archives, in order to improve AI. Now, I can see why this is desirable if you want to make AI, less, if you want it to look at things that are perhaps more factful than the things it has previously been looking at. But at the same time, what is the AI that's been trained on this data? What is it going to do then? And that hasn't been answered.
Right. Very expensive academic publications, I think.
That's definitely bad.
That's your business. And that's the show. Thanks to Roz.
Thank you.
Marie.
Thank you.
And our guest this week, Alan Phillison.
Thank you.
Hang around for the extra bit after Demon is a Monster by Corner Shop, and a grateful salute to the supporters who keep us going. You can join them for as little as £3 a month. Get the podcast early without ads, plus lots more bonus stuff. Search Oh God What Now Patreon, and we'll see you next time.